Welcome to the Jesse Freeze Show on WMTR 1250 AM, a Beasley Media Group station. Brought to you by www.insidernj.com. Online news for political insiders in New Jersey. Streaming live on WMTRAM.com and TalkStreamLive.com.
I'm Jesse Freeze. My guest today, United States Democratic Congressman Josh Gottheimer, representing the 5th District of New Jersey. He prides himself on his bipartisanship. He works across party lines on key issues and is co-chair of the Problem Solvers Caucus. Just 2 months into his first term, he passed his first amendment in the House, which was signed into law. And there have been many more since. Gottheimer has been named one of the top 10 members with the most amendments considered on the House floor. And it's a pleasure to have you join us this morning, Congressman Josh Gottheimer.
Thank you so much for having me, Jesse. It's a huge honor to be here.
Pleasure to have you. Also joining us, Max Pizzaro, editor-in-chief and co-founder of Insider NJ. Thank you for joining us this morning, Max Pizzaro.
Thank you so much, Jesse. Thrilled to be here with you both. Thank you.
Before we begin, Congressman Gottheimer, the news dominating the headlines is Donald Trump and 18 allies who have been indicted in Georgia on 41 accounts over their efforts to overturn his 2020 election loss. Trump calls this a witch hunt. Fulton County District Attorney Fani Willis secured a 41-count racketeering indictment against Trump and 18 others, including New York City former Mayor Rudy Giuliani, who pioneered RICO prosecutions and is now charged in one. As a member and a bipartisan member of the U.S. Congress, what is your take on this? And Trump faces in total 91 felony accounts.
I think it's very clear that former President Trump bears some responsibility, in my opinion, for January 6th. It's part of the reason I felt that he should be impeached, which I voted for in his efforts to overturn the 2020 election. I was in the gallery and in the House chamber when the attack on the Capitol occurred. It was not a tour. It was an attack on our country, the greatest country in the world. And I believe we've got to get to the bottom of this. I trust our system and the courts to do that. And obviously there's been a very thorough investigation. And I think appropriate action now is to understand what happened, who bears the responsibility in the eyes of the court. And it's part of the reason, Jesse, why I was so involved in helping pass, and I led in the House of Representatives, the Electoral Count Reform Act, which passed right at the end of the last Congress, which establishes clear guidelines for counting electoral votes for president and vice president, clarifies the role of the vice president as being purely ceremonial, and raises the threshold of members of Congress to initiate objections, and ensures that electoral votes tallied by Congress actually reflects each state's vote for president. Because part of what happened last time was that they were trying to pressure the vice president, members of Congress, to fail to certify an election in the will of the people.
Absolutely.
And so the good news is that legislation is now law. And so I'm hoping for all future elections we take that out of the equation. But you can't take out of the equation what I believe President Trump played a key role in the attack of the United States Capitol.
Pardon me, Jesse, but do you believe then that the third indictment, that is the federal indictment, sir, is more important or more severe than what came out this week, the fourth indictment out of Georgia?
None of us are immersed in all the evidence of what they've got in each particular instance. Obviously, grand juries have indicted. The federal prosecutors have been working for some time. The prosecutor in Georgia has been working for years as well. It's one of these things that will be difficult to really tell which one of these indictments will ultimately, what the outcome will be for each of them in these various courts. But Max, what I think is pretty clear is that you see a series of instances where former President Trump acted in a way that is not becoming of our great country, of that office, which I think deserves the respect both in it and out of it. And again, I was there. There was an attack on the United States Capitol. And I don't know how if you were watching that day, watching the former president and what he said. And of course, we'll see what the other 18 defendants, what comes out in terms of what role he was playing. I think it's very important that evidence is out there and we get to the bottom of actually what happened that day to prevent it from ever occurring again and holding those responsible.
If he is found guilty of even one indictment, can he still run, Congressman?
He can still run, whether or not, that will be left to the voters in terms of holding him accountable for the outcomes of any of these indictments and cases. And then there's the matter of what will ultimately, if he were found guilty, what would happen?
Is it true, and I'm hearing this from all sorts, that if Trump is reelected, he still has a strong base behind him, that he can postpone any indictment for 4 years?
Well, again, that's going to have to be up to each judge in the matter and decide if they want to hold the former president, make accountable now and make him answer for these charges. But these are extremely concerning accusations and evidence in all these cases. They're all very serious. And of course, anything that undermines our democracy, I believe, is very serious. But I think what you're seeing, Jesse, overall is extremism versus common sense. And you've got some extremes in this country who want to stand behind the former president, despite his actions. And I believe at the end of the day, the country wants reasonableness. They want people who put the country first. They want common sense, and they want to turn the page on all this division. I know I do. I think a lot of people I speak to regularly are sick and tired of people who appear to not put the country ahead of themselves or party, frankly.
Well, this is an excellent analysis, and may justice triumph. May we all pray for that the right outcome comes to being. Turning back now to our planned interview, Congressman Gottheimer, you played a key role in crafting and passing the bipartisan infrastructure bill, and this bill is helping build the decrepit Gateway train tunnel, bridges, roads, New Jersey Transit, as well as you're fighting climate change. What are some of the major problems that you've solved in this? And can you address this for us?
Well, I think we all agree, and Jesse, it's a really important question. If you look at just infrastructure, both in our country and especially where we live in the tri-state area in Jersey, we know that it's taken a beating over the years. Our infrastructure is older than other parts of the country, and it was built longer ago. And, the weather is tougher in Jersey than it is in Florida. Right. So, our roads require a lot more work. The tunnel that you're talking about, the train tunnel that's under the Hudson between New York and New Jersey, where trains run, is, 110 years old or older. It's literally fallen apart.
Will it last while they're doing it, do you think, while they're trying to repair it?
Well,
because if it doesn't,
it's a great question. There's a lot of studies on that. And what they're doing right now is aggressively repairing as they go. I'll say it's basically putting Band-Aids on I've been in that tunnel. They're literally putting Band-Aids on problems where you got leaks, right. They deal with it. You've got electric problems, they try to fix it. But it's why a lot of the tunnel, one of the other tunnels comes down pretty regularly. We're left with one tube to go in and out of New York while they're fixing with the other one. But, this is not a way to run a state or an economy where 20% of the country's GDP runs through our region, and we're stuck with, a system that's fallen apart. So we've got to invest in mass transit, which the infrastructure bill that we passed, the bipartisan infrastructure bill, which the most significant investment in infrastructure in 100 years, it deals with not only the Gateway train tunnel, but making sure that we address our crumbling roads, our bridges, many of which I've visited, that are also literally falling apart. They were built during New Deal era bridges. They're crumbling. They go around on our highways regularly with basically long sticks to knock off pieces of concrete, chunks of concrete, before they could fall on the highway, right? To just get rid of them. I mean, you're talking about in a great country like ours, that's what you're dealing with. So this is going to help invest in fixing those, the bridges, the roads, the tunnel that we talked about. It's a huge investment in jobs, 2 million jobs a year for the next decade. These are hardworking men and women of labor jobs, great jobs. And Jersey does incredibly well. Part of what I focused on in the negotiating was making sure that we took care of the Northeast, which pays in to the kitty and the central kitty far more than other parts of the country. And I thought it just only and we get back less. So I thought we're going to get $8 billion for Jersey for our highways and our roads and bridges, $1 billion for critical water infrastructure to get forever chemicals like lead water and PFAS out of our drinking water. We've got resources for upgrading broadband. We've got a lot of places in New Jersey that don't have any access to reliable, affordable, high-speed internet. We've got resources for electric vehicle infrastructure and climate resiliency, dealing with floods and issues of that nature, $4 billion for public transportation. When you look at it, it's a huge investment in Jersey and our country and our economy.
Well, you're doing a great job.
Pardon me, Jesse, but is there a specific stimulus here for best practices, Congressman, essentially more rail and trying to get fewer people out of cars in any sense? Does the money account for any kind of visionary plan in that regard?
I mean, part of the debate we had, and it's a great question, Max, part of the debate we had was making sure that you can you're looking forward to the future where you're will invest more in mass transit, of course, and more in electric vehicle infrastructure and alternative energy. At the same time, recognizing that you can't just pull the plug on what we have now, right? I mean, you need both. And one of the issues I've been talking about a lot lately is, the congestion tax. And people keep saying, well, everyone should just take mass transit. And I said, well, I'd love that. I'd love a system where we had mass transit the way some countries do, where it is reliable and is dispersed to all parts of suburbs and not just some areas, and actually doesn't leave out the rural parts of our state. But the truth is, right now, our mass transit system needs a lot of investment still. It's why I fought so hard for the infrastructure bill and to make sure we invest in mass transit, because New Jersey Transit doesn't go to a lot of places in our state. Our bus system, as you know, is not everywhere where it needs to be. We've got a bus terminal that can't handle more capacity in New York City for where people are commuting to. We're doing more on electric buses now, and that's in this bill, but you still need a place for the buses to go, and they need to go on the roads as well, and those roads have to work. Unfortunately, the reality is that our bus services have been cut back since the pandemic. So in a lot of places, there are no buses. You've got rural parts of New Jersey that have no bus service or even any train service. You got a lot of suburbs with zero train service. And I talked about the Gateway train tunnel, and Jesse, you were saying it's incredible. You can't add more capacity and more train. We can't even add more trains to the system. There's no way they'd get into New York. As it is, they're backed up outside many of our train stations. If you go to Secaucus or Newark, you got to wait because there's no room to get into the system. We don't even have room on enough platform space in New York's Penn Station to let people off. So all these things have to be fixed, right? So you got to fix these things and invest, and then you can tell people, hey, we expect you to use more of this, but you're kind of putting the cart before the horse. We got to do both at the same time. We got to
But do we have enough funds
and make sure our roads are fixed.
Do we have enough funds to fix all this, Congressman?
Well, I certainly am going to keep fighting for more. We just got $1.2 trillion for the country and a huge slug for Jersey. But, we're going to need more investment to keep it up on both fronts. And that's where, something I've been very focused on since the day I got to Congress. And we're going to have to keep investing and encouraging people wherever they can to build more mass transit options. But it all comes back to, for New York, we got to get this Gateway train tunnel done, which will give us 4 tubes ultimately when it's finished, 2 in, 2 out. And we've got to make sure we fix the bus terminal in New York City and get these platforms expanded.
Absolutely. And the last on this list is climate change. Are we standing on the precipice of disaster with climate change?
Well, I don't know, anyone who's living in the world right now, I don't understand how you say that climate change doesn't exist, right? They still have people have this debate with some folks, although it's far fewer than we used to, with all these climate issues that we're facing as a country. And we see it with the flooding here and with fires and storms around the country and the heat waves. The great news about legislation, not just the infrastructure bill, but the Inflation Reduction Act, which we passed at the end of last Congress, makes significant investments in climate resiliency, in electric vehicle infrastructure, incentives for people to move to alternative and cleaner energy, because I think you need to incentivize people to do that and to build and to make these investments and make it affordable for folks. We've made the largest climate investments ever in the last couple of years, and I think that's critically important, but it doesn't happen overnight. And as you know, we live in one world. So if China keeps putting online coal plants like they're doing right now, that affects us, right? You're still right, and so it's not like you can build a giant wall to the air where you say, well, that's over there, that's your problem. We're all sharing the same planet here.
And Congressman, the next on my list, New Jersey is still suffering from SALT, or the federal tax deduction for state and local taxes, which has been capped at $10,000 since 2017. New Jersey has among the highest property taxes in the nation. And by reducing the SALT deduction, New Jersey residents are forced to pay taxes on their income twice. This is unfair. It's burdensome. Will this ever be solved? And what can be done about it?
Well, Max will tell you, Jesse, I've been talking about this issue since we've talked about this issue since the beginning of this fight, when the red states stuck it to us. I affectionately call them the moocher states, because they take far more from everyone else than they put in, and they decided, listen, they were going to give other tax breaks for themselves. at our cost, and that's literally what they did was they took that SALT deduction. And folks who don't know about this is where it used to be that you could deduct what you paid in property taxes and your state income taxes, but from your income before you pay taxes, your federal taxes, so you didn't get taxed twice on the same income. And New Jersey for property taxes are higher. I wish they were lower, but it is what it is. We're able to deduct and save money, and now we can't. So two things I like to see is one, obviously, let's get these property taxes down and taxes down overall in Jersey. But secondly, we need to get this deduction back fully so that it's not limited, as you pointed out, Jesse, at just $10,000 total that you can deduct with what you pay in your property taxes and your state income taxes. The House, we've passed it. Democrats leading in the House have passed it now 4 times to restore the state and local tax deduction, to give it back. We've not been able to get it out of the Senate, where you need a high threshold of votes. And depressingly, the tax committee, which is now the Republicans that are in charge in the House, the tax committee just passed their tax bill out, and it didn't include restoring the state and local tax deduction, which is incredibly frustrating. I'll give you good news, then we'll move on to the good news. Within the next 2.5 years, 2015, it will come back. So the tax bill that was passed limiting SALT and capping $10,000 expires, and the deduction comes back if nothing else happens. So there's some folks who are negotiating now and trying to get deals cut so it can come back sooner. But if no action occurs, it comes back. And so I just want to put that out there because I think that's at least something to look forward to.
Well,
Jesse, he's right.
Go ahead,
he has
Max.
been fighting for this for years, and we truly appreciate it. I would just add this as a follow-up, Congressman, if I could, and that is the average taxpayer sees you fighting those moocher states and appreciates it, but simultaneously sees spending going up considerably in Trenton. In fact, since the last governor, the budget has risen by $20 billion, Congressman. And you touched on it. You said we need to lower property taxes in New Jersey, but what can they do at the state level to complement your good work at the federal level, specifically in terms of getting that budget down to give the average taxpayer the sense that it's not just going after the moocher states, but also taking care of business in our state?
Well, that's like a 2-hour-long question and 2-hour-long answer to that question, because I think if you're talking about the state budget, there's a lot we're going to have to keep looking at. And part of the concern is we're not growing jobs and associated revenue at the rate we should be in terms of bringing jobs to Jersey. And we've lost a lot of taxpayers. And as you know, Max, it's complicated because you've got to look at every aspect of the budget. That's not just a simple answer. The piece in Congress that I've been focused on and really trying to address is how do we at least get more dollars back from the federal government, our tax dollars back to Jersey, where historically we've not been great at this. So when an infrastructure bill passes or the CHIPS Act passes, something I worked a lot on, the bipartisan CHIPS Act, which deals with the fact that all these, we saw this during the pandemic, especially all these things like semiconductors and chips that are built in China and how reliant we are on that region for chips, and we don't build enough in the United States. And it's incentives to actually start building more in the United States, which I think is critical to our competitiveness, especially against China, which I see as our number one adversary. We have to figure out how we get more of these jobs here, more of the creation of our manufacturing base here, and bring these jobs actually to Jersey and fight that when bills come out like the CHIPS Act, we in Jersey actually fight for dollars to New Jersey. When the infrastructure bill happens, we fight on all these competitive grants with other states to make sure those dollars come to Jersey. Then we're up in my district, since I'm in office, 357% in terms of what we're getting back to the 5th Congressional District, just by fighting for these dollars for cops and firefighters and fire trucks and roads and other things. And that's the part that I can do a lot more to play a direct role in right now, and it's where I'm going to continue fighting for. So Max, you asked a great question. I'm not sure I can answer you in even a 20-minute radio show without having a much longer conversation on this, but I think you're right to bring up the concern.
By restoring the SALT deduction, we can provide immediate tax relief to hard-working families, which is so important for New Jersey. I've got to go on a break.
And Jesse, when you get a fire truck back, and you get the federal government to bring our tax dollars back here to pay for that fire truck, if it's $1 million for a town, which I've gotten a few of these, then the amount of money that's saved on the property taxes is significant, right? That local town doesn't have to put that on their property tax line. Just like, as you point out, if we can claw more of these dollars back when we get SALT back for folks, all those things will help on making life more affordable here, which I think is critically important.
Congressman, you were instrumental in getting the Bipartisan Chips and Science Act signed into law. It reduces our reliance on foreign countries like China, Iran, Russia, North Korea, and other oppressive regimes. And as a member of the House Select Committee on Intelligence, you understand that the safety and security of the United States is at a critical juncture with rapidly evolving threats and foreign terrorists. Also, Congressman, a subject I'm very much interested in, you have done so much to encourage electric vehicle companies to not drop AM radio from their cars. AM is vital importance, and as you say, the backbone of emergency alerts on the road. You even contacted Elon Musk on this. Give us your take on AM radio and the importance in New Jersey.
Well, you just said it well. I mean, not just is AM great for shows like this and for sports and for news, but we've invested as a country a significant amount in the National Public Warning System, which it backs up AM radio stations to make sure that, God forbid, there's a cyber attack or a nuclear threat or a natural disaster like Sandy, that our radio systems are still able to work and people can still get information, right? That AM still works. And AM bands travel further and they're able to get through buildings, unlike other stations, and they're backed up, right? So Sirius radio is not backed up. There's no power backups if there's a natural disaster. 47 million Americans listen to AM radio every day, and the viewership is increasing. We've got unbelievable amounts of great AM radio in New Jersey that people listen to, including for so many different communities and targeted like African American, Hispanic radio, and Asian American radio. And my feeling for those like Elon Musk, who came out and said, we don't feel like spending the money to keep AM radio in vehicles, right? Because what happens with electric vehicles, there's some static interference. They have to spend a few bucks and put a coating on to stop that interference. It works. It's fine. They just don't want to spend the money. And I said to Elon Musk, give enough money to buy Twitter and send rockets to space. You certainly can afford to keep AM radios in your Teslas and protect our national security. And so Ford Motor Company reversed course, and now they're going to keep AM radio in their vehicles after announcing they weren't going to. And now I'm calling on all the others, and I've got bipartisan legislation in the House and the Senate to require it for a safety perspective to make sure that we keep the AM radio in our vehicles.
Wonderful. And there are 77 AM radio stations in New Jersey depending on you. Thank you so much for joining us this morning, United States Congressman Josh Gottheimer.
Thank you for having me. It was great. Jesse, thanks for all you do. And you're a gift to Jersey and the area. And so are you, Max.
Amen on Jesse. And thank you for a substantive conversation to both of you. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Take care.
Thank you. We'll be right back with Max Pizzaro, editor-in-chief, co-founder of Insider NJ, on mental health in New Jersey, bullying, and the heartbreaking outbreak of the rise of young children committing suicide. I'm Jessie Fries.
John Graham, founder and CEO of Fairview Insurance Agency Associates, has been providing excellent service for the people of New Jersey since 1970. Fairview Insurance is a premier family-owned and operated independent full-service insurance agency based in Verona and Cherry Hill, New Jersey, working on behalf of individuals, companies, and public entities providing customized insurance plans, employee benefits, investment, and financial planning services. Fairview holds more than 30 licenses to service clients' needs in New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and New York, as well as nationally through specialty insurance programs for hard-to-place risks. Fairview Insurance Agency's knowledge of the industry, cohesiveness, and deep commitment to values have inspired confidence among their many thousands of clients. Fairview Insurance Agency Associates, Verona, New Jersey will win your trust.
For the latest up-to-date news, visit www.insidernj.com. Online news for political insiders in New Jersey, featuring politicians, attorneys, medical, celebrities, and people on issues in the news.
Fairview Insurance Agency, 25 Fairview Avenue in Verona. Find them online at fairviewinsurance.com.
Welcome back to the Jesse Fries Show, brought to you by www.insidernj.com. Online news for political insiders in New Jersey.
Welcome back. Max Pizzaro, as chief editor for Insider NJ, what is your take on Donald Trump and his 18 allies' recent indictments in the Georgia case?
Well, I think it's one of the most important indictments in our country's history, Jesse. I think this is an indictment that truly tests the foundations of the country and the limits of power and the degree to which we, as a nation, will allow one person to assume despotic control and conceivably nullify an election. He's been charged with standing at the head of a criminal conspiracy numbering at least 19 people, and they are named in the indictment, and going and willfully, when he was advised and he knew he had lost the election, going and attempting to use his power to overturn the results of the 2020 presidential election. You're asking me what my immediate thought is of it, and that is,
yes,
this will be difficult to tie to Joe Biden or the Democrats in Washington or in New York City because it's coming out of Georgia. This is the Fulton County prosecutor, and this was a Republican Secretary of State leaned on by the Republican president who resisted his attempts to reverse the election in Georgia that Joe Biden won. It's a very, very serious case that goes to the heart of our identity as Americans.
It certainly is. Max Pizzaro, you have written many heartbreaking accounts of children being bullied and committing suicide. What is being done to stop this, to fix this? Tell us about your interviews with some of these parents of children who have taken their lives.
Well, Jesse, you actually educated me regarding a bipartisan social media bill championed by U.S. Senator Richard Blumenthal, it's called the Kids Online Safety Act. And Senator Marsha Blackburn. Yes. And I didn't know anything about this until you keyed me into it. And I really think there's a lot of value here because I will say this, Jesse, many of these laws don't have any teeth. And it's just, frankly, a lot of talk. And you and I have both spoken with Diane Grossman, and she said we don't really need any more laws without teeth. And I do think this bipartisan Kids Online Safety Act does have some teeth, and it would update the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act. It protects children under age 13, and it specifically lays out what corporations that own these social media platforms need to do in order to limit the influx of damaging material into our kids' minds and lives. So it is, in fact, moving forward. It moved out of committee, and to this point, it has languished in Congress. But this is a critical piece of federal legislation that will, in fact, go some ways in holding these big corporate entities feeding our kids this gibberish and very damaging material accountable.
And what role does social media and online play on these suicides of young children?
It creates all kinds of social pressure. It's a social pressure sometimes that our kids can't organize. And so it's going at them all the time. Tremendous peer pressure. And in numerous cases where these beautiful young kids have ended up committing suicide, they felt like they were in a pressure cooker of intense scrutiny and ridicule, oftentimes by their peers on social media platforms. And sometimes it's difficult to assume a sense of control of one's young life with all of this out there. And so this federal bill in particular would stem some of that. And there's still a long way to go. And of course, as you and I have discussed before, it really does begin with families and parents in our own homes, really making sure that we're vigilant and protecting our young people. Starts there, but we also need legislation and we need social factors to assist us and to fortify our best efforts to protect our children, the most vulnerable among us.
They certainly are. Unfortunately, we're running out of time. Max Pizzaro, last question. What are some potential signs parents and caregivers should be aware of that might indicate a child is struggling with suicidal thoughts?
I think that children have a tendency to become withdrawn. This is a virtual world, Jesse, that our kids are contending with. And what happens is they become more withdrawn from their families and more engaged in those so-called relationships and friendships online. And the telltale sign is when you see your child withdrawing from those normal family interactions and becoming more subdued or becoming disengaged from reality. That's the first telltale sign.
Our time has come to a close. Thank you, Max Pizzaro, Editor-in-Chief of Insider NJ, and Congressman Josh Gottheimer for joining us today. It's been a pleasure.
Jesse, it is an absolute pleasure to always be with you. Thank you so much for everything you do. And I'm just thrilled to be on the show with you and with the Congressman. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. I'm Jessie Freeze. We'll be right back.
Welcome to the Julie Briggs Show on WMTR 1250 AM, a Beasley Media Group station, brought to you by www.insidernj.com. Online news for political insiders in New Jersey. Streaming live on WMTRAM.com and TalkStreamLive.com.
Trump indicted for the fourth time. Joining my political roundtable this morning, Alan Steinberg, columnist for Insider and J, Independent. Thank you so much.
Delighted to be here, Julie, as always.
Larry Kasha, Republican State Committeeman, attorney, Kasha and Kasha. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you. Appreciate the opportunity.
Richard Ty, former CIA agent stationed in the Middle East. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
Murray Sabrin, author, ran for Congress, Republican Libertarian. Thank you so much.
Good to be with you again, Julie.
And Dr. Zenon Christodoulou, New Jersey Board of Utilities Commissioner, Democrat. Thank you so much.
Good morning, Julie, and good morning, everyone.
Donald Trump indicted on 13 counts in the Georgia 2020 election case.
Today, based on information developed by that investigation, a Fulton County grand jury returned a true bill of indictment, charging 19 individuals with violations of Georgia law arising from a criminal conspiracy to overturn the results of the 2020 presidential election in this state. The indictment includes 41 felony counts and is 97 pages long. Every individual charged in the indictment is charged with one count of violating Georgia's Racketeer, Influenced, and Corrupt Organizations Act through participation in a criminal enterprise in Fulton County, Georgia, and elsewhere to accomplish the illegal goal of allowing Donald J. Trump to seize the presidential term of office beginning on January 20th, 21.
How serious is this indictment, Alan Steinberg?
Well, I'll answer by making a quick prediction, although I have to make a point of personal privilege. We lost a great American this afternoon. I left the Republican Party because of Trump, but we lost Jim Buckley, who was one of my favorite. He died at the age of 100. A great former U.S. Senator, rest his soul, and I just wanted to mention that.
Yes, absolutely.
In terms of Donald Trump, like I say, I'll make a quick prediction. He will be convicted of most of the charges in the District of Columbia. Also, Fannie Willis, one of my American heroes, indictment down in Atlanta. And they will be upheld until they get to the Supreme Court. The question there will be, which way does Amy Coney Barrett go? But he is now unelectable. You're going to see a movement among Republicans to get behind Glenn Youngkin eventually as an alternative to Donald Trump. Chris Christie's waged a great campaign, very courageous, very honorable, but he can't be nominated. Ron DeSantis is living proof that a political dolt can get into Yale undergraduate and Harvard Law School. Not a chance. Look for Youngkin down the road. A very well-crafted indictment in both the case of Jack Smith and in the case of Fannie Willis. And I think the evidence is mounting. The question is, who will flip? That's the big question. But even without flipping, I think he's going to be convicted. And that's to stop threatening witnesses, because Judge Youngkin may have no alternative but to incarcerate him if he keeps this up.
Larry Kasha.
Well, if we're looking at the different cases, there are four basic different cases here, and the Georgia being the last with the 20-count indictment. That one of the four might be the strongest. And the reason I feel that way is because we have Donald Trump on tape asking the Secretary of State there to find these additional votes. The other cases that we were talking about here, especially the New York case where we're talking about fraudulent record keeping, that one's going nowhere. Those other cases I don't think are going to amount to anything other than the fact that it's going to be great political theater. The problem that I have is that on some of these cases, especially the New York case, the charges here are stemming back from an incident that took place in 2017. And everybody, the vast percentage of people that are listening to this right now, on some level find it suspicious that they waited until during the election cycle, till after President Trump decided he was going to run again before these indictments took place. And so especially in the New York case, it's suspicious with regard to the timing of it. And the other issue that's going to be put out there, by Trump's lawyers is the First Amendment. And, where does it start and where does it stop? And does it always have to be truthful? And does it have to be knowingly false in order for us to waive our First Amendment rights? So there's a lot of things that are going to happen within the next couple of months to determine whether or not these cases can go forward and have much effect on the election.
Dick Ty.
Yeah, I think Smith did a brilliant job of putting this indictment together. He didn't go after what he said, by the way. This is not a First Amendment issue. This is what he has done. These are acts that the man has committed that are going after our democracy as we know it. This is very dangerous. This man is dangerous to our country, to our way of life, and I can't believe how many people follow him. The other thing is, the indictment that came out of Bragg, I think Bragg is a moron. When he brought that case, when he went into office, he had a case built against Donald Trump. He decided not to bring it, and two outstanding lawyers resigned because the guy's a moron and they didn't want to work for him. That case, is so full of holes that it'll sink faster than a Swiss cheese.
Murray Saber.
Well, it's interesting, Julie, that this is the fourth indictment against former President Trump. And one of my favorite analysts on cable, who is respected throughout the country until he started defending Donald Trump, is Alan Dershowitz, who said in his 50 years of teaching law and 60 years of being involved in law, he's never seen an indictment that has more holes in it regarding the Georgia case. And he said, I did the same thing with what Trump and his associates during the 2000 election, where there was a concern about the Florida vote. And he said, we went in there to try to get more votes for Gore, and we didn't succeed. And that was that. Instead, in this case, Dershowitz said that politicizing or weaponizing the legal system in order to make sure that Trump gets more indictments just before the primaries and the general election. So although I'm not a fan of Trump, I didn't support him in 2016 and the primary, and I didn't vote for him in 2016 either. I just find that the whole thing is an example of the weaponization of our legal system. And this is very dangerous because the Democrats have the power now. They're going after their perceived political enemies, and when the Republicans get in, they may do the same thing, and we're going to go back and forth like a tennis match of who's got the power and who are they going to go after legally. And so what Dershowitz said, this is kind of fascinating. Dershowitz says he wants the opportunity to vote against Donald Trump in the 24 election for the third time, because he voted against him in 2016 and 2020. So I think Dershowitz should get a round of applause for saying, let the people determine who's going to be in public office, as opposed to using the judicial system to try to undermine a political candidate. And I think we have to applaud him, because he's certainly not doing this as a partisan. He's a liberal Democrat. He's proud of it. And he says in our democracy, the people should determine who's in office, not the judicial system.
Dr. Zenon Christodoulou.
Well, Murray, I agree with you totally. I think the path we're heading down here is a very dangerous one for our democracy, for our country, and for our social structure. Alan, to your point about this maybe going to the Supreme Court, I think you're right on that. But I think over the next 6, 12, or 18 months or more, I think the public is going to be so familiar with the Constitution's supremacy clause and how federal employees and officials are immune from state prosecution, and how they can kind of tweak that to their advantage. But the worst thing about this is what it's going to do to our society. Already it has divided us. It has helped or created a distrust of the political system more than I've ever seen. People have always been a little bit cynical of things, but now we are in clear camps. Each side has such animus to the other side that even the thought of finding consensus on very important issues, I think, is going to be lost for the long run. And we have actually more important things to focus on. Although this is important, don't take it the wrong way, but we have more important things to focus on than is a RICO law being implemented the correct way, or what is a criminal enterprise. Really, how do you define racketeering? And really, were people to make a decision whether Trump's call was a perfect call or whether it was a perfectly flawed call. So I think the legal part of this is going to help divide us even more, discredit the political process, and get people more disgusted with what's going on in Washington and capitals all over the country. And I think this is the biggest potential victim of what we're going to observe. It's the trust in government. And I hope that we can come out stronger from this. I'm optimistic, and I think we will. People will eventually realize that our system does work with all its flaws. We're going to come through the country, and democracy itself should be all the stronger for it. But, tighten your seatbelts. This is going to be a hell of a ride.
I have to inject one quick. Alan Dershowitz is absolutely false in that contention that Gore did the same thing, and I'll tell you how I know that's false. I was involved in that recount for George W. Bush. We never saw Gore do anything like that. The moment the Supreme Court decision was made, he conceded the election. There were never any false electors. There was never any attempt by Gore to falsify the electoral count under the Electoral Count Act. There was nothing that was similar between the Gore recount tactics and what Donald Trump did. That's nonsense.
Well, take it up with Alan Dershowitz, Alan, because he's the one that said, though.
And I don't trust a word he says anymore.
Okay, because he defended Trump.
No, but
Okay.
Of course not, because he's wrong. What can't you get through your head about that?
And not only that, he represented his business that he's still a liberal Democrat. He represented Carrie Lake, who was a fanatical woman trying to become the next governor of Arizona. I'm sorry, I don't buy a thing that Alan Dershowitz says anymore.
It's amazing. It's amazing how people turn on someone who they disagree with. When he was the darling of the Democrats for decades.
It's not.
Well, you're full of beans.
I was there. I was there for that recount. I know what happened.
Okay.
Well, he doesn't want to accept it because these are known as facts.
Larry Kasha, there are 91 felony counts stacked up against Trump between all of his indictments. Do you believe there will be convictions in any of these?
Well, like I had said earlier, the only one that there's, I think, some potential merit to is the Georgia case, wherein he called the Secretary of State there looking for votes. Don't forget, we're not talking about civil trials here. We're talking about criminal trials. So there has to be criminal intent. They're going to have to prove that Donald Trump knew about what was going on. There are other co-conspirators. As a matter of fact, in Georgia, I believe there's 19 of them. And the question is whether or not Donald Trump was, for instance, this was a violation of the law down there, whether or not he had the criminal intent, whether or not he had the knowledge. It's going to be very difficult for the prosecution to show that. The only other one that there might be some potential of a conviction is in the federal case where we have that hidden memo of his attorney, Chesborough, where in essence they were looking to bring in electors and then have Pence question whether or not which electors were correct and throw the whole thing into the hands of the Supreme Court. And at that point, find out whether or not the new electors were going to be found legitimate or not. And the reason why I'm saying that there's a potential there is if we remember, it was Donald Trump that was pleading with Vice President Pence at that point to follow through and not find that the electoral college that was being brought before him was a legitimate one. So there's some indicia there that he knew, but otherwise these other cases, there's a question as to whether or not he even knew what was going on and there's criminal intent or not.
Alan Steinberg, Mark Meadows is seeking to get his case moved to federal court. What is the significance of these charges at the state level versus federal?
Well, Mark Meadows may have a case to have his portion of the case removed to federal because the question is whether he committed his criminal acts under color of law. Donald Trump is a stone loser if he tries to have his indictments moved to the federal court because the president has no role in the electoral college. He has no role in the counting of votes whatsoever, nothing at all. I'll tell you, there's a whole new wrinkle in the case. I have an admission to make. I used to be friendly with Roger Stone at one time, okay? Because of Donald Trump, we became mortal enemies. But Roger Stone, the tape that came out of him a few days, even before the election was decided, saying we got to have the legislatures take control of these cases. In effect, Murray says it's up to the electorate. He's right. It's not up to the legislatures to take control of these cases. And that's what Roger was trying to do. And that may be even more damning evidence of this. But Trump will lose any attempt he makes to remove the case to federal court. Mark Meadows is the have a chance.
Yeah, if I can just jump in here, I don't think Donald Trump wants to move this to federal court because if in essence this does go to trial, his jurors are going to be from Fulton County. And he did exceptionally well in Fulton County. So I think if this ends up going to trial, he's going to want Fulton County jurors.
I don't think so. I think he's scared to death that there are African Americans in Fulton County too.
Well, whether he's afraid or not, I think it's a tactic that his lawyers are looking at this point because there's been no motion on his part to move this to federal court, only Mark Meadows.
There will be.
Dr. Christodoulou, a group of Trump supporters posted the names and addresses of the grand jurors online. Will this lead to intimidation of the jury?
Well, Julie, of course, and that's what it was intended to do. There's some evidence that the names and addresses that they published are not actually accurate, but that's not the point. Some of those addresses may be wrong. It is public record, so it's not like they had to do some deep digging for these names of the grand jurors. But of course, the intent was to threaten and jeopardize the process. We're heading down a path now, which is just really awful. But I want to mention one thing about what Murray just said. And you're absolutely right about the debates. I think if they don't debate, don't share their views of the future, I think that they disqualify themselves. But the first primary is 5 months away. It's around the corner. Now, we know that in previous elections, things can change on a dime. They always do. But oftentimes, those candidates are from a whole group of really unknowns. On the national stage, they're unknown. So their fortunes ebb and flow. In this case, with Biden and Trump is a very known quantity, probably too well known a quantity. So I'm not sure whether his supporters are going to really wane. I believe they're going to stick with him. And if these charges don't become really irrefutable to even some of those MAGA Republicans, which is a tall order even to think about. It's really hard to imagine them, not, trusting Donald Trump and trusting these allegations. But if they don't come to a consensus like, wow, this is really bad for our country, I don't see how he loses the primary. The charges against him are serious, but his supporters are going to follow his narrative. And I've paid attention to some of what that narrative is, and it is a vastly different view than what the indictments spell out. So we are really in an emotional stage right now. The logic is not prevailing. It's unlikely to prevail through this whole process. And it's built on emotion, which is probably going to continue through the primaries, caucuses, and through the nominating process. Finally, I think that there is time. There's a year before the Democratic primary, and it would be an interesting thing to have a brokered convention or something at the convention to change the course of this. But I think a lot of people would become disenfranchised because they would see through it as just a deliberate plot from the beginning. So I don't know if that would really ingratiate the Democratic Party at such a late date, 2 months before a general election.
Check one thing as to what you said, Zenon. You are correct that the MAGA folks will continue to adore Trump, but there's one thing the polls do not mention. There is a growing anxiety, even among MAGA people, that Trump has become unelectable. They don't want to see a Democrat landslide, particularly if I wrote this in my column this week, particularly if they have available someone like Youngkin who shares their social agenda on abortion, on same-sex marriage, on everything else. They can have someone who shares their social agenda who is neither corrupt nor authoritarian and can possibly win. They don't want to go down to a landslide defeat. So if the pollster asks them, what do you think of Donald Trump? They're going to still say, yeah, we love him. But what they're not measuring is that among the donor class that is pro-Trump, they're already looking for somebody else. They don't want a landslide. And the same thing is true of your average MAGA voter who doesn't want to see a catastrophe. I think that is what is not showing up in the polls. I think what Youngkin's going to have to do, he's going to have to file for Super Tuesday. He's going to have to do what Eisenhower did at the convention in '52, which is to have a floor fight to allow Trump-elected delegates to be releasing their pledges. But he can win both of those.
Alan, and I don't mean to say this in a bad way, but you're assuming that there's too much of a logical process in voters' minds. A lot of times it's very emotional, it's very visceral, and on the balance sheet, you're absolutely right. But I think when it comes to the ballot box, people's emotions still rule the day.
Just keep waiting.
We do have to go to a break. I'm Julie Briggs. We'll be right back.
John Graham, founder and CEO of Fairview Insurance Agency Associates, has been providing excellent service for the people of New Jersey since 1970. Fairview Insurance is a premier family-owned and operated independent full-service insurance agency based in Verona and Cherry Hill, New Jersey, working on behalf of individuals, companies, and public entities providing customized insurance plans, employee benefits, investment, and financial planning services. Fairview holds more than 30 licenses to service clients' needs in New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and New York, as well as nationally through specialty insurance programs for hard-to-place risks. Fairview Insurance Agency's knowledge of the industry, cohesiveness, and deep commitment to values have inspired confidence among their many thousands of clients. Fairview Insurance Agency Associates, Verona, New Jersey will win your trust.
For the latest up-to-date news, visit www.insidernj.com. Online news for political insiders in New Jersey, featuring politicians, attorneys, medical, celebrities, and people and issues in the news.
Fairview Insurance Agency, 25 Fairview Avenue in Verona. Find them online at fairviewinsurance.com.
Welcome back to the Julie Briggs Show, brought to you by www.insidernj.com. Online news for political insiders in New Jersey.
Welcome back. Will Donald Trump's indictments affect his election bid? Here is Bill Barr's prediction.
I actually think he's not going to be the nominee, whether or not he's convicted. I think over time, as people actually focus on the decision, they will see that he's the sort of the one person who could lose to Biden. I think it's somewhat early, and a lot of these other candidates aren't as well known as Donald Trump. And I think when push comes to shove, it'll be clear that there are other candidates who can win decisively.
Dick Ty.
The Republicans should keep in mind what happened in 22. All the pollsters were saying it was going to be a red wave. And largely because of Trump and many of the candidates that he put up, the Republicans almost got swept out. It was a blue wave more than a red wave. So I think they've got to be very, very careful here. Trump is going to do nothing but hurt the Republican Party. He's demolished what the Republican Party used to stand for. There aren't many real Republicans left. And by the way, I think Chris Christie is one of them.
Larry Castro.
Dick, as far as that red wave is concerned, I don't think it had anything to do with Trump. It came down to purely and simply the Supreme Court overturned Roe versus Wade. And every Democrat that could write or speak was banging on that. And that's what hurt us. That's what hurt us. It had nothing to do with Trump.
Murray Sabrin.
Well, yeah, I thought the Democrats, the Republicans were going to do well, given that inflation peaked at 9% in the middle of 2022, and the Republicans couldn't capitalize on that, even though Biden is not responsible for the inflation. It's the Federal Reserve, stupid as people would say, because they're the ones that have the printing press, they have the monopoly of printing money. And so the Republicans really blew an opportunity to take control of the Senate by having fairly weak candidates in Pennsylvania and Georgia, for example. And as far as the abortion issue goes, it just shows you where our culture is, Julie, because all the Supreme Court did was take the abortion issue back to pre-73, which said that this is not a federal issue, this is a state issue. And that's where I was in 1973, even though I was pro-choice at the time. And it just shows you how our culture has evolved to the point where some people, some voters, particularly I think young voters, think that, maybe some older voters, think that abortion is the most important issue facing the country. And when we have a war in Ukraine, we have an unprecedented debt, we have regulations that are stifling the economy. And so we have a budget that's literally out of control. The debt is going to keep on rising until one day we wake up and there'll be very few buyers of our Treasury securities. And that's when we go into high gear where the Federal Reserve will have to buy up all this debt. And that has huge implications for the economy. And no one's talking about it. The only one that seems to be talking about these issues, which ironically is in the Democratic Party, it's RFK Jr., where he's talking about the Ukraine war. He's talking about the military-industrial complex. He's talking about Big Pharma. He's talking about the border issue. And you would think that the Republicans would be smart enough, if they understand the issues, that it's the Federal Reserve that's distorted this economy and the unprecedented spending on both sides of the aisle. And I'm making a nonpartisan issue here, even though I'm a Republican. The spending on both sides of the aisle has been incredible for the past 20 years. And if we don't get that under control, Julie, with the entitlements, with the discretionary spending, we are headed for a very bad place economically.
And look, this is a very important point and really speaks to the division that's emerging and it has been here in our country, where people are focusing on particular wedge issues and not much larger issues. Clearly, the economy, inflation, unemployment, wages, all these things are so much more important to the grand scheme of things, but we're not focusing on it for various reasons. We can spend much more time on that. But Murray, I mean, you know this, that inflation is not exclusively the result of Federal Reserve policy. It also has to do with trade policy, but also has to do with investment, the Investment Reduction Act, Inflation Reduction Act, which is ironically named, but a lot of other things that the White House does have a big influence over. But to your point, and I agree with you, we need to focus on keeping our economy strong, finding ways to employ people in high-wage, high-growth jobs, and without breaking the bank, because if we do go into an even further downturn, if the war in Ukraine escalates more, if oil and gas prices rise as they did, and we saw the repercussions of this, what are we going to do? How many tools do we have left in the toolbox to fight these inflationary pressures? And I don't know that we have much left at our disposal. So it's a really important time for us to focus on large picture items and not just what the broad-based media, mainstream media is feeding us, because the people have to stay aware of what the future really holds and what the decisions we make today will impact over the next generation. And I think we're taking our eye off the ball, as it seems you do as well.
Alan Steinberg.
I want to address something Murray said. You know, Murray, none of us are women here today except for Julie. And so women, the right to make a decision over their reproductive freedom options and in terms of their own bodies, that is the most important issue to them. Understandably so. They don't want to go back to before 1973. In 1973, the Supreme Court made it a right of women to make a decision during the first 2 trimesters about abortion. They don't want to give up that right. This will continue to be the most important issue to women, and that's why women are going wholesale over to the Democratic Party. And that's why it will continue to, and this is one problem Glenn Youngkin will have. But I think that right now, I think that you are going to see among Republicans a desire to avoid disaster and the knowledge that Trump at the top of the ticket is a disaster. I admire Chris Christie, and I'm not a Chris Christie fan for the campaign he's waged, but the MAGA folks, which continue to be a majority of the Republican Party at the grassroots, they are not going to accept Chris Christie. They will accept Glenn Youngkin because of his social agenda.
Everyone's talking about democracy. Well, isn't democracy basically done at the state level, where a lot of issues are decided, or most issues are decided? So what the Supreme Court said, let the states decide this issue instead of the federal government. And we know that states, even red states, are making abortion legal. So what's the problem here? I think this is another wedge issue that the Democrats have been using pretty successfully in driving their voters to the polls. But the point is, democracy is working. Red states are allowing for abortion, and so be it. Even though I disagree with that, so be it.
The vast majority of the people who are out there that are voting at this point aren't looking at the intellectual side of those conversations that we're having today. They're not looking at the fact that the Supreme Court didn't really make its decision based on abortion. It made its decision based on the fact that the original Roe versus Wade case might have been decided on constitutional precedent that shouldn't have been decided, because there's no right to privacy in the Constitution. And most of the people aren't concerned as much with the economy as they are with whether or not Britney Spears is still under a conservatorship. And so unfortunately they vote off of sound bites, and they don't take the intellectual route and think about what's happening to the nation.
Chris Christie is one of the only candidates swinging at Trump.
Were you surprised, given you know the former president and his penchant for either taking advice or not taking advice, that he canceled that Monday press conference he'd set up because of his lawyers?
No, I'm not surprised by it, because what he now knows is he's facing jail time. And he can't make his situation much worse and expect those lawyers to be able to do anything to help him. What he should have done is listen to his lawyers back in the White House between November of 2020 and January 20th of 2021, when they told him, if you continue with this election interference activity, you are going to spend the rest of your life dealing with the criminal justice system.
Will this strategy work for Chris Christie? Larry Kasha.
I think it will, to be perfectly honest with you. It's something that he's done now for several weeks. 2 weeks ago today, he was on Face the Nation, and he came out swinging against Trump. I think the nation basically likes the fighter that Trump is. They don't care for his tactics and his morals and his methodology. But Chris does, Chris has that same ability to come out swinging, and I think they're looking for that at this point. And I happen to think that we shouldn't count our former governor out. I think Chris Christie has an excellent shot of being the alternative to Donald Trump because he has some of Donald Trump's qualities that we admire, but he doesn't have the problems with his personality that Donald Trump has.
Dr. Krista Duther.
If we go back 8 years, Christie really was the Donald Trump before Donald Trump because he was the guy calling it straight and really focusing on people. If the Republican Party was, as I believe they were, looking for an outsider to be critical of government, 8 years ago it was Chris Christie. Trump just came in and upended everybody and outdid them, outplayed Christie at his own game in a way. But you know what? This current situation with all of Trump's indictments and legal troubles couldn't be a better script for Chris Christie. Because as a former U.S. attorney and prosecutor, this fits right into his comfort zone. If we were talking about economic policy, foreign policy, war interventions, maybe Chris Christie wouldn't be so comfortable and outspoken. But man, these issues now against Trump, this is teed up perfectly for a former prosecutor. You can even tell how comfortable he feels talking about this stuff, how authoritative and how convincing he is to the public. So yeah, don't count him out. The narrative really plays to his strength, and he's doing a wonderful job coming up for Donald Trump. And he may be prophetic, and I think the people will respect that and possibly even reward him.
Alan Steinberg.
The alternative to Trump among the Republicans, we're dealing with a Republican convention here. We're not dealing with general convention of Republicans, independents, and Democrats. To be acceptable to Republicans, the alternative has to have two things. Number one, he has to be a person who hasn't attacked Trump personally. Now, I admire Christie for those attacks. They're justified. But he alienates the whole MAGA base of the party by doing that. He has discredited Trump, but at the same time, he's alienated the MAGA base. Number two, the Republican alternative to Trump is going to have to share the Trump social agenda. And that's where Glenn Youngkin comes in. He's even more ultra-conservative than Trump is on a lot of these social issues. That's why I think I have counted Christie out as a possible nominee, just as I've counted out Asa Hutchinson. It's going to have to be someone who wasn't in direct conflict with Trump, who is somehow electable, who at the same time has a very conservative social agenda.
Alan, I'm getting the impression that you like Glenn Youngkin for president. I don't know.
No, I'm not going to support him.
I don't know if anybody else is listening.
No. I'm not going to support him. I'm analyzing. I will not support him. I don't dislike him, but I'm giving you political analysis. A lot of times I end up predicting people to win that I don't want to see win. I'd rather see him than Donald Trump as the president. I intend to support Joe Biden, but I actually agree with Murray Sabrin. I wish the Democrat nominee was somebody else. I wish it was Gavin Newsom, but Biden unfortunately isn't going anywhere, and he's in jeopardy against Youngkin. I think against Trump, I think Biden is a sure winner. But no, I am not supporting Youngkin. Absolutely not. I'm giving you analysis as to why I think he has a strong shot at being the Trump alternative. But again, he's going to have to do a floor fight to get Trump delegates released, and he's going to have to get into the Super Tuesday primaries, which means he'll have to make a decision on running right after the November election. If the November legislative elections don't turn out well for him, his status as an alternative is reduced also.
We have to go to a quick break. I'm Julie Briggs.
John Graham, founder and CEO of Fairview Insurance Agency Associates, has been providing excellent service for the people of New Jersey since 1970. Fairview Insurance is a premier family-owned and operated independent full-service insurance agency based in Verona and Cherry Hill, New Jersey, working on behalf of individuals, companies, and public entities providing customized insurance plans, employee benefits, investment, and financial planning services. Fairview holds more than 30 licenses to service clients' needs in New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and New York, as well as nationally through specialty insurance programs for hard-to-place risks. Fairview Insurance Agency's knowledge of the industry, cohesiveness, and deep commitment to values have inspired confidence among their many thousands of clients. Fairview Insurance Agency Associates, Verona, New Jersey will win your trust.
For the latest up-to-date news, visit www.insidernj.com. Online news for political insiders in New Jersey, featuring politicians, attorneys, medical, celebrities, and people and issues in the news.
Fairview Insurance Agency, 25 Fairview Avenue in Verona. Find them online at fairviewinsurance.com.
Welcome back to the Julie Briggs Show, brought to you by www.insidernj.com. Online news for political insiders in New Jersey.
Welcome back. At least 111 are dead and 1,000 missing in the tragic Maui fires. Could this have been prevented? Alan Steinberg.
I don't know if it could have been prevented. I'm still studying all the facts and circumstances. It is a terrible tragedy. It proves something that, people talk about the dangers of war, nuclear war, and everything else. The worst disasters in life continue to be natural disasters like this. Horribly tragic. I don't know what can be done to prevent it.
Larry Kasha.
Well, preventing it, I'm not sure there's anything they can do about preventing it, but what they can do there is potentially improve their warning system. Apparently the sirens weren't going off because those are the normal sirens that they use in case of tsunami. And the people there are trained to head to higher ground when they hear those sirens, so they didn't want to convey the wrong message. So, preventing it, who knows? Potentially minimizing the loss of life, there's something that potentially could be done there.
Dr. Krista Duther.
Certainly it would have been an incredible blessing to have this avoided, but it doesn't seem like that would have been possible. But as we just heard, certainly some of these lives could have been saved if things were handled differently. What that could have been in hindsight, sure, we're going to figure out what should have been done. But at the time, it's a tragedy beyond belief. It continues to be. I spoke with a colleague who is a commissioner over there in Hawaii, and it seems that everyone in Hawaii knows someone or at most 2 degrees of separation from someone who lost their lives or is currently missing. It's hard to imagine that of the 1,000 you mentioned, Julie, that are missing, that unfortunately that many, if any, are going to be found in the right state. People who got in the water, the temperatures of the water were unsurvivable. As crazy as that may sound, if we see a huge body, Pacific Ocean, you're fine. But the temperature of the water heated up so much for 2 miles out to sea that anybody who even attempted to swim might have just found it, was an impossible task. So we have to learn from this as best we can, take preventive measures for the next thing. But as we see now in Canada and Portugal and Greece and so many other places around the world, Mother Nature is relentless. And as much as we try, we can't eliminate those issues. And actually, I think, Larry, you may have mentioned that nuclear weapons aren't worse. Actually, nuclear weapons are a lot worse because not only would they kill people instantly, and we're talking millions, but also it would create these kind of fires everywhere in the region. So let's hope that we limit these things and don't even begin to think of surviving a nuclear attack from anyone, because this is all things that we cannot take any chances with.
Changing gears, at a Moscow security meeting, China's defense chief called Taiwan unification inevitable. I want to know your comments. Marie Sabrin.
Well, China's view, and again, using the Alan Steinberg standard, I'm trying to give it a political analysis here. China views Taiwan as a breakaway province, and therefore they think they have a legal and moral claim to Taiwan as a part of China. So we'll see how it plays out. We know that Hong Kong was peacefully reverted to China. Margaret Thatcher negotiated that a policy, and so Hong Kong is back into the fold of being part of China, but being a separate economic unit for the most part. So maybe that'll be the inevitable relationship between Taiwan and China. That will be politically part of China, but economically it will be its own economic unit and continue to thrive as it has been since it became a nation state after World War II.
Alan Steinberg.
I would have said it was inevitable reunification in the late 1960s and early 1970s. I do not feel it is inevitable now, because what has happened in Taiwan is the emergence of a thriving economy and democratic institutions. You didn't have this back when when Mao Zedong and his forces gained control of China back in 1949. You had a situation where Chiang Kai-shek was an incredibly corrupt dictator. He was not some kind of model of democracy. And so he and his remaining forces fled to Formosa, Taiwan at that time. And the prospect was eventually there would be reunification. But it's not the case today. Taiwan has a much more strong sense of separate nationhood. I think reunification would be regrettable. I would not have said this at the end of the 60s.
Larry Kasha.
In all candor, I don't think it's going to have anything to do with whether or not Taiwan is a democratic state and thriving economically, because this is rhetoric that's come out of China now for ever since the communists took over. It might be by force. And I know that we've indicated that we would come to their aid, but we've learned some lessons in Vietnam about trying to fight a war literally on the other side of the world. And I'm not certain that the Chinese are ready to do it, but at some point in the future, I think they might force the issue, and even if that means making a military move.
Dick Ty, as a CIA agent, we want to know your opinion.
Well, President Biden's doing something very intelligent today. He's meeting with his counterparts from South Korea and Japan, and it's to strengthen the military cooperation in that region. Both Japan and South Korea have had experience dealing with China, both militaristically and so-called diplomacy-wise. So I think it's a very smart move that we strengthen the military over there. We continue to support South Korea and Japan and check everything that China's trying to do. And they're strangling Hong Kong. Hong Kong used to be somewhat of a democratic state till the British gave it up, but now they're strangling that. So we've got to continue our pressure against China.
We have to go to a break. Speed Round is next. I'm Julie Briggs.
John Graham, founder and CEO of Fairview Insurance Agency Associates, has been providing excellent service for the people of New Jersey since 1970. Fairview Insurance is a premier family-owned and operated independent full-service insurance agency based in Verona and Cherry Hill, New Jersey, working on behalf of individuals, companies, and public entities providing customized insurance plans, employee benefits, investment, and financial planning services. Fairview holds more than 30 licenses to service clients' needs in New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and New York, as well as nationally through specialty insurance programs for hard-to-place risks. Fairview Insurance Agency's knowledge of the industry, cohesiveness, and deep commitment to values have inspired confidence among their many thousands of clients. Fairview Insurance Agency Associates, Verona, New Jersey will win your trust.
For the latest up-to-date news, visit www.insidernj.com. Online news for political insiders in New Jersey, featuring politicians, attorneys, medical, celebrities, and people and issues in the news.
Fairview Insurance Agency, 25 Fairview Avenue in Verona. Find them online at fairviewinsurance.com.
Welcome back to the Julie Briggs Show, brought to you by www.insidernj.com. Online news for political insiders in New Jersey.
Speed Round is brought to you by Fairview Insurance Agency in Verona and Local 68 operating engineers in West Caldwell and Atlantic City.
Again, Speed Round is brought to you by John Graham, CEO and President of Fairview Insurance Company, Verona, New Jersey. First speed round question, 30 seconds or less answers. New Jersey Senator Dick Cody is retiring after 5 decades of service in the Assembly, Senate, and as acting governor. Your comments. Alan Steinberg.
Dick was a Hall of Fame member of the New Jersey Senate, very much statesmanlike. It will be a loss to the state Senate. He was also anti-corruption and very concerned about the downtrodden and the maintenance of quality of education. He will be missed. Now, it's resulted in a major conflagration among the Democrats in the 27th district. Hopefully, for their sake, it'll come to an end soon. I have to say that it's been something to see Brendan Gill's wife move aside so that Brendan will now be able to come into the assembly. That's true marital strength.
Larry Kasha.
Well, whether you admired his political views or not, you have to admire the fact that he was a statesman and that he served this state for a very long period of time. But I can tell you as a Republican, politically, I'm glad to see him go because he was a strong candidate. And I would imagine that candidate that comes in behind him will be strong, but not as strong as Dick Cody. He knew what he was doing.
Dick Ty.
Yeah, I agree. Cody was very admired, and people really love the guy. And he's going to be missed in the Senate, and, he'll fade slowly into the sunset.
Marie Sabrin.
Every time a political leader leaves office, we should celebrate, especially Dick Cody having served 50 years, sort of the poster child for term limits. And when I was running for the U.S. Senate, I spoke to one of his constituents in Essex County who said, and I don't know if it's true because I didn't confirm it, but given that Dick Cody was the insurance business, this gentleman said Dick Cody would use his powers of persuasion to get insurance business as a member of the legislature. So again, here's another example of the cronyism, if this is in fact true, of people using their political position to obtain business for their private business.
Dr. Krista Dulu.
Senator Cody has been an institution in this state for 50 years. And I heard a few of you say that, he still is, guys. I know he also has a funeral home, but
yes, he is.
He's still around. I think his legacy will be that he brought so many great policies to this state, including issues on mental health, which I think are critically important. He was one of the first advocates to try and get things moving in that direction. He had a lot of experience with his family that he knows, so God bless him for bringing that to the front of our attention. But I think it's really important that when somebody in business or in politics or anywhere realizes that it is time to go and doesn't look back too late and say that it was time to go. So I think he goes out on top. He's done everything he could have for the state for 50 years. And I think the time is right. He gets to spend time with his family and kids and grandkids and all those wonderful things. And he's not going down until the very end. Like a lot of people have said, they don't want to die in office. And why should they?
Next speed round question. A federal district court dismissed a challenge to student loan forgiveness in a Biden victory. Will this last? Alan Steinberg.
I've been a firm opponent of student loan forgiveness. The only change I would make would be to allow those with student loans who can't pay to file bankruptcy, but not just a blanket forgiveness. I think that, I think this is an issue, quite frankly, where Biden is trying to, and I'm supporting him as still, although I'd rather see a Democrat replacement. I don't think this is such a winner for Biden to champion this issue. I think that there's a lot of people who decided not to go to college, who went into very good careers for society, particularly in the manufacturing sector. And I don't think they're thrilled to hear that he's trying still to pull it out for student loans to be forgiven.
Larry Kasha.
Not a fan of student loan forgiven. Why should someone who decides to go into the trades, such as a plumber, pay for the general education of a college student? And plus the fact, I think it really goes beyond the executive order of forgiving student loans. It really goes to the fact that how far can a president go in issuing executive orders? When our last several presidents didn't like the fact that Congress wasn't acting, suddenly they came up with an executive order, which is really beyond the purview of their abilities under the Constitution. So we're going to see this in more and more situations where there's executive orders that we disagree with.
Dick Ty.
I think it's a mistake. I agree with Larry Cascio on this. This is something that people go into the trades, get no kind of help at all, and now they're expected through their tax dollars to subsidize people who went to college. I don't think it's fair.
Marie Sabrin.
Julie, this is the most blatant, explicit attempt to buy votes with taxpayer dollars. I mean, this is just so over the top that what the panelists said should be said on steroids. This is totally political. And Alan is right. There should be provision in the law that if you can't pay your debts, you go into bankruptcy. Everyone else can do it on other things, but for some reason, you can't do it for student loans. And by the way, since I'm the only one, I think, on this panel that had a 35-year career in higher education, this is another example of the federal government butting their noses in something that it shouldn't, because what the federal government has done with all the subsidies is increase the cost of tuition, which is the fastest rising component of the consumer price index for the last 20 years, including healthcare, which is another example where the government intervened massively with subsidies. So again, economic and financial analysis suggests very clearly that when the government keeps on subsidizing something, you're going to get major distortions in the economy. In this case, it's a huge student debt burden, and the only way out of this is for students to be able to declare bankruptcy and get the government out of education completely.
Dr. Krista Dulu.
So, Murray, I don't have 35 years in academia, but I have 25. And I know a lot of the thousands of students that I've taught over the years worked 2 and 3 jobs. They scrimped and saved to pay their tuition bills. So it's not just that the people who go to trade school or choose not to go to school are going to have to pay it through their taxes. But it's people who did go and sacrificed. It's for parents like me that put 3 kids through college and sacrificed a lot of other things so the kids could go and wouldn't come out with debt and wouldn't have to declare bankruptcy or wouldn't wait for a student loan forgiveness program. And yeah, it does seem like it's making good on a populist campaign pledge, but to socialize the cost of living is a dangerous slope that we're going to go through. I mean, what are we going to, what's next? You buy a Ferrari, you can't afford it, and then, somebody pays it off for you. It was a rational. So. Yeah, no, I'm with you. Make sure it's a convertible, but a rational decision that people went into. Granted, it is ridiculously expensive. That's a totally different issue. But when you know the cost and you can project the cost and you make a decision to go or no go and you take it, there has to be some accountability to your decisions. And this, I think, just not only is it difficult to swallow, like I said, as a parent who paid for 3 kids to go to school, grad school and PhD programs, but also I think it could lead on a very slippery slope. Where does it stop?
We have to go to a break. I'm Julie Briggs. More speed round when we return.
John Graham, founder and CEO of Fairview Insurance Agency Associates, has been providing excellent service for the people of New Jersey since 1970. Fairview Insurance is a premier family-owned and operated independent full-service insurance agency based in Verona and Cherry Hill, New Jersey, working on behalf of individuals, companies, and public entities providing customized insurance plans, employee benefits, investment, and financial planning services. Fairview holds more than 30 licenses to service clients' needs in New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and New York, as well as nationally through specialty insurance programs for hard-to-place risks. Fairview Insurance Agency's knowledge of the industry, cohesiveness, and deep commitment to values have inspired confidence among their many thousands of clients. Fairview Insurance Agency Associates, Verona, New Jersey will win your trust.
For the latest up-to-date news, visit www.insidernj.com. Online news for political insiders in New Jersey, featuring politicians, attorneys, medical, celebrities, and people and issues in the news.
Fairview Insurance Agency, 25 Fairview Avenue in Verona. Find them online at fairviewinsurance.com.
Welcome back to the Julie Briggs Show, brought to you by www.insidernj.com. Online news for political insiders in New Jersey.
Welcome back. Next speed round question. Governor Murphy signed a bill allowing residents to receive SNAP benefits for the maximum amount of time before renewing. Do you support this? Alan Steinberg.
Yes, those go to those really unable to fend for themselves to any realistic extent. And I'm always for programs to make basic survival affordable.
Dick Ty.
Yeah, I agree with Dr. Steinberg. The people in the lower rungs of the income levels need all the help that they can get especially in New Jersey, New York metropolitan area. Our cost of living is just so high and so out of control. So I think they need every kind of help they can get. And SNAP is a good program.
Murray Sabrin.
Well, again, with my libertarian perspective within the Republican Party, it's not very popular across the political spectrum that all we're doing is making people more and more dependent upon government for basic survival. And we do have a sector that addresses these issues. It's called the nonprofit sector. In the old days, they were called mutual aid societies, which dealt with these issues at the local level without federal government involvement, and it worked quite well prior to the Great Depression.
Dr. Zenon Christodoulou.
Julie, this is really one of the things, in my opinion, that needs to be on the top of the priority list. And thank goodness that Governor Murphy saw the benefits in trying to make the process by which people reapply to the SNAP program, he made it easier. So the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program that we have is to help people that are food insecure. And let's just think about what that means. These people can't afford food to feed themselves or their families. The pre-depression nonprofits from 100 years ago versus the society we live in today, we can't rely on nonprofits to really feed people, because what happens if that nonprofit goes out of business or nobody funds it?
Last speed round question.
We're still together, still going strong.
Rosalind Carter turns 96 this weekend, and Jimmy Carter nears 99 as the longest living president. Your comments, Alan Steinberg.
You know, I never was a supporter of Jimmy Carter, and my differences with him became more profound over the issue of the survival of Israel. I'm a very strong supporter of Israel, and I had profound differences with Jimmy Carter on that. But I admire him personally. I think he was one of the great ex-presidents, the effort he put forward for habitat and all the rest. And I admire Rosalind Carter, too. And I think that the fact that they continue to survive, Rosalind has dementia, which is very sad. My mother passed away from that. But I admire their fortitude, and they are one of the great couples of the Western world. A wonderful marriage.
Dick Ty.
Yeah, the Carters are a beautiful couple. Jimmy Carter is one of those guys. He was not much of a president. He was only one term, but he was much better as an ex-president. I think he accomplished more. He made peace missions. He's worked to settle disputes in different areas. And like I said, I think he's been better as an ex-president than he was as a president.
Murray Sabrin.
Well, just congratulations to the Carters on a wonderful marriage, I think 75 years. And let me just say something about Jimmy Carter's presidency, which a lot of people don't know about. If it wasn't for his deregulatory policy, which was done at the behest of Cornell economist Alfred Kahn, the 1980s boom that people give Reagan a lot of credit for would never have happened, because Carter was smart enough to realize that deregulation was strangling American industry, and he ran with that proposition, and we enjoyed a great economy in the 1980s. And on a personal level, I just want to wish my wife a happy anniversary this coming week. We'll be celebrating our 55th wedding anniversary.
Oh, congratulations. Dr. Chris Tudulu.
Well, I'd also like to wish you guys a happy anniversary. All the best to you, and another 55 years to you. Jimmy Carter was president at a very difficult time. He probably didn't do himself many favors by just being there at the wrong time. But he and his wife, Rosalind, they really have shown themselves to be such wonderful examples, high-principled people that really, I think, dispel the myth. When we talked about earlier, and we talked about so many times, the contempt and criticism that people have today of politicians, you know what? That's not the Carters. Nobody could look at them and say, well, they were corrupt and they did things for themselves or for the wrong reasons. They may not agree with them, but they're shining examples of really how things could be. And let's not forget, Jimmy Carter was a Navy nuclear engineer. He's a brilliant man. He worked hard, and he has maintained his decency, both of them, their decency through the last 50 years outside of the presidency. I think they should be commended and really heralded as great examples of Americans and of decent people.
Our time has come to a close. I thank all my political roundtable guests this morning. Alan Steinberg, thank you so much.
Thank you, Julie. Always delighted to be here.
Larry Kasha, thank you so much.
Well, thank you for the opportunity. It's good to debate issues without being disagreeable.
Dick Ty, thank you so much, and thank you for your service.
Well, thank you, Julie, and it's great to be here with a great panel.
Murray Sabrin, thank you so much.
Always a pleasure, Julie, and keep up the great work.
Dr. Zenon Christodoulou, thank you so much.
Julie, thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful day.
I'm Julie Briggs. For Jesse Freeze and myself, have a great day.
You're still the one that so glad we made it. Look how far we've come.